rencontre.
Tonight's session is now open. Good evening. I'm reading, so welcome to the 12th meeting of the Joint Special Committee on the declaration of emergency created following the standing order of the House of Commons on March 2nd, 2022, and as following a Senate order on March 3rd, 2022. Today's meeting will be a hybrid format according to an order from the House of Commons on November 25th, 2021. In case of a technical problem, please alert me so that we can suspend the meeting for a few minutes so that all the members would be able to participate in the meeting. We'll now go to our agenda for today. It is on future work of the committee. We do have motions by Mr. Motz, I believe. Is that okay, Mr. Motz? Okay, so notice of motion 1 from Mr. Motz. I'm going to read it. That the committee deem the evidence, including testimony and documents, received by and published on the websites of standing committees of the House of Commons and the Public Order Emergency Commission in relation to the February 2022 Public Order Emergency and matters consequential to it, to have been received by this committee and may be used in its reports, provided that it shall not limit the questions which may be asked of witnesses appearing before the committee or documents which may be requested or ordered to be produced by the committee. Does someone have an intervention? Yes? I'm trying to understand. Point of order. Are we going through all these conservative motions, one after the other? We will have a motion to present when you're ready. I'm not sure if my NDP colleagues or the senators would have motions as well. I'm trying to understand how the meeting's going to go ahead. Well, I have the 8 motions. The notices of motion from Mr. Motz, I'm going through them. We can make amendments. I understand that you have a motion. We'll be able to look at it afterwards, unless there's an objection. That's fine. That's fine.
Oui. Alors, est-ce que j'ai le consentement unanime?
Do I have unanimous consent on notice of motion 1? Yes. Carried. Notice of motion 2, that the committee direct the joint clerks to invite each individual or organization listed on the analyst work plan dated May 11th, 2022, to submit a brief to the committee for its consideration, with briefs encouraged to be provided to the joint clerks within 1 month of the adoption of this motion, provided that the joint clerks shall arrange for translation of the briefs received and circulate them to committee members and publish them on the committee's website upon completion of the translation. Any interventions on this motion? Any comments? Mr. Virani, yes, thank you. It's wonderful to see you once again here and to see all my other colleagues. I hope that you had a wonderful summer.
Motion, it may be wise perhaps to, we can address it now or we could table it to a bit later, but our principal preoccupation with this motion is that it seems somewhat premature insofar as that we don't know which witnesses will be arriving nor what the testimony of those witnesses will be. And we do have some concerns that the analysts have done a lot of work and there's a lot of names that have been suggested by the analysts and by the various parties. And it might be wise and more prudent to actually vet those lists and cull it to reduce it to a more manageable number before we entertain motions such as this about submitting briefs. So I'll leave my submission there. Merci.
Sénateur White. Merci.
Thank you very much. If you can hear me okay. Thank you very much. Similarly, I'm a little bit concerned about a blanket, and I would like to as well get a list of the witnesses and a list of what they've presented to date and when we expect to see those witnesses in the future before going through and asking for what's requested in this motion. So I'm not agreeing or disagreeing at this point, but I don't believe we should follow it at this point in time. I'd like to delay this one or set it aside for a future discussion.
Merci. Monsieur Mott.
Thank you, Mr. Motz.
Thank you, Chair. With respect to my colleagues, I think the idea here was not that every witness that's on the list is, that's the expectation. I think that there's some, we obviously, even though they supply a brief, we're still going to want them here in person. And it might provide us an opportunity to actually weed out some of the witnesses we may not require and may actually be efficient for the working of this committee. So, I mean, it never hurts to have more information than less. And that was the whole idea behind this, is that we would gain a lot of committee efficiency if we actually invited those who are on our list of witnesses, organizations included, to supply a brief and invite them to supply the brief. They don't necessarily have to. And that was our thought.
Senator White.
I have to say, I'd like to look into the whites of their eyes when reading their brief rather than just reading a brief. I think we need to be able to debate and ask questions. I've seen the witnesses we've had to date, and I don't think any of those I would have accepted just a brief from. I would have expected to be able to ask tough questions of witnesses, so I would rather do that than, at this point anyway, we may end up there, but at this point, I would rather have them in front of us.
Monsieur Brock. Yes,
I also welcome back every member of this committee. It's good to be back. Good to see smiling faces.
Arif said it for me. I didn't know.
But I think there is a middle ground here, and I think the spirit perhaps is lost in the language of this particular motion. We are trying to move this committee forward with a reasonable expectation of an end date. And keeping that goal in mind, when I reflect upon the sessions that we had last year, one word comes to mind, and I was left with this pretty much during all of my attendances, and it was frustration. Frustration given the format of this committee, the nature of a very brief 5-minute overview, which really, to some witnesses, only scratches the surface. The limitations that we have in terms of the minutes assigned to each particular questioner. These are issues that we're going to get into later on this evening, if not today, some other day. But the whole purpose to Senator White's commentary, and I think it's very, very appropriate that I address that head on. And I agree with him that it is, wherever possible, it is always preferable to have witnesses to attend, to be able to question those witnesses. I use the phrase cross-examination given my previous background. But we have such a volume of witnesses left to be heard. And I think if we, on a week-to-week basis, start to project the number of witnesses for the following week, we may come to a conclusion that there are some witnesses that we may deem them not to be as controversial as others, and therefore we could invite them to submit a written brief that we'd all be satisfied with. But moreover, say, for instance, we do get a written brief, we are not precluding any member's ability with this particular motion and other motions to preclude any member of this committee from having an opportunity to question that particular witness. So I think a more robust background as to why we drafted that particular motion was necessary for me to put on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Monsieur Green. Monsieur White, j'ai votre nom. Vous êtes le...
Mr. White, I have your name. You're next. Mr. Green.
Thank you very much. And, I would like to take the opportunity to go on the record and say that I certainly shared some of the frustrations that have just been identified. I think reflecting back on our opening statements and what I think was the general intention of this committee was to be a fact-finding committee, to be able to establish a certain set of facts that we would then provide recommendations back to the House of Commons and the Senate on what was, in my opinion, a fairly important and extreme and historical moment in Canadian history. And I think that using this to provide what I read as, in the spirit of the motion, a bit of a deposition statement that does go beyond introductory remarks that would allow these witnesses to establish, the facts as they see them, I think would give us a better ability to, when in person, then question those facts rather than use the 5 minutes to establish facts that in many cases, quite frankly, they were just refusing to provide us. Like, I want to put that back on the table, that we had many witnesses come to this committee and just like flat out refuse to cooperate, and I think that that's a problem. So I'm in favor of a written process that goes beyond introductory remarks and gets into, particularly on some of the more sensitive issues, things that we might deem necessary to be read and kept in camera, given the sensitivity of the security of the matter. But I would like to see and have the ability to prepare for some of these witnesses in more meaningful ways. And I'll conclude with this, that my frustration over the summer was that through the media and through FOI reports, we were able to establish more facts over 2 months through the media doing their work than, in my opinion, the witnesses that were present here. And oftentimes I would find that witnesses were refusing to answer things that they knew would eventually become public, just to, in my opinion, that frustrated this committee. So I'd like to move beyond that and hopefully get a greater level of seriousness from witnesses, that when they come here, they're going to come prepared to answer the questions that we have at hand after establishing the facts that they're going to be presenting to this committee through this motion. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Green. Monsieur White.
I almost promise this is the last time, Mr. Chair. If nothing else, I would like to actually have a chance over the next 2 weeks to go through the list of witnesses we've had, what material we've had, because I have to be honest, I can only think of maybe 2 witnesses that I don't have a request for more information from. So I'd like to adjourn this at least for the next couple of weeks until I can go through a list of witnesses we have, what our projection is, and maybe then hear it again.
I'm not opposed to that.
Is that okay? Okay.
Chair?
Arif wants 2.5
Chair?
weeks.
If I may, it's given it's our motion, I would agree to that we just suspend this conversation or this discussion on this until we've had a chance to look at some more witnesses and bring it back maybe in, I don't have a calendar in front of me, but in 2 weeks from now, 10 days from now.
Alors, est-ce que tout le monde est conscient, est-ce qu'on suspend?
Is everyone in agreement that we suspend study of motion 2? Yes? Yes? Adjourn debate on motion 2. Now, notice of motion 3, that the committee sent to each individual or organization listed on the analyst work plan dated May 11th, 2022, written questions submitted by the members of the committee for response, provided that A, members shall provide their questions to the joint clerks within 3 weeks of the adoption of this motion. B, members may designate up to 5 questions per individual or organizations as priority questions. C, individuals or organizations shall be directed to respond. 1, to priority questions within 3 weeks of the joint clerks sending them, and 2, to all other questions within 6 weeks of the joint clerks sending them, provided that a failure to respond to questions shall be approached by the committee as if a witness declined to respond to an oral question asked at a committee meeting. And finally, D, the joint clerks shall arrange for translation of the responses received and circulate them to the committee members and publish them on the committee's website upon completion of the translation. Mr. Green.
Practical way, the way that it reads, I would assume that it's every member that would get the opportunity, or would it be allocated based on seats in terms of us getting 5, you getting 15, and then I take that and I put it up against the witness list, and I just don't know if it's practical, if I'm being honest, in terms of what is before us. That's not to say that, when witnesses arrive, should there be answers that are left unfulfilled, then maybe this amendment, there could be an amendment to this that would codify our ability to have follow-up questions within reason that would demand for the evidence to be returned and not necessarily make it as an optional response to committee.
Merci, Monsieur Green. Monsieur White.
Yeah, not in a dissimilar place. I think this will be a new Bible we'll be writing if we do this, particularly the types of questions we'll want to ask. And I do think we missed some opportunities with our last witnesses. I felt that they often left. I was left with more questions than I received answers at the end of some of those presentations. So I'd like to see them again back in front of us. Secondly, I would totally support that if we get to a point of having a witness where we still have a lot of questions, that we be permitted to provide a list of written questions with an expectation for a list of written answers within 7 days of their having been a witness or something like that. Obviously, we can't obligate some of those witnesses to provide answers, but I think we should do everything we can to do that. I would support that. I think this is just, although I understand why you're asking it, I think it's almost impossible to perform, personally, anyway. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Monsieur. Merci, Monsieur White. Monsieur Virani.
So along the similar lines, I think the practicality of this motion number 3 is seriously in question in terms of there's no actual limitation on the number of questions, for example. So you could have 100 questions being provided, only 5 of which would be prioritized. I think this was raised earlier in a different context, but the notion of also having written questions submitted and then answered, if that person didn't appear, you would lose the ability to cross-examine or challenge the people on their evidence. And you also can't use written interrogatories as a form of compelling information from a witness who otherwise has the discretion whether or not to appear. So I think that's important. The notion of potentially following up after the fact, as Senator White has mentioned, after a witness appeared, if there were still outstanding issues, that I think would probably circumscribe the number of questions, force us to be a bit more targeted in the questions that we pose, and also allow us to pose fewer questions, thereby facilitating the work of the committee. So for those reasons, I would be opposing this. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Virani. Monsieur Motz.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate the intervention from my colleagues. And notwithstanding those comments, what I find to be untenable moving forward actually is the fact that we have so many witnesses, and we want to have some sort of a timely response to the conclusion of this particular work of this committee. That if we are going to bring witnesses back that we're not satisfied with it the first time around, and we can't even get through our first round of witnesses in a proper way. I can't imagine how long we're going to be here, because this session goes till 2025. We just might still be here. Well, not you, Gwen. I'm sorry, but how about would you be amicable to an amendment? And I guess to this, if that's, go ahead, Matt. Sorry, Chair. I'm prepared to present a friendly amendment to this, to our own motion, but that the motion be amended by A, replacing the words listed on the analyst's work plan dated May 11th, 2022, with who appears as a witness, and B, replacing the words the adoption of this motion with the date of their appearance. So that would then read, so let me find it here. Yeah, that the motion be amended to say that provided that, where I got to find it here, hold on. Does that work?
We present them with a list of questions to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
answered within 7 days, blah, blah.
Yeah.
We can draft something.
Yeah, that would make better sense, I think. Not better sense, but it would probably be, take care of the concerns that have been addressed as well. Then, it would leave those of us who have lingering questions to ask them. 30 each? I'm just teasing.
I'll sell mine.
Monsieur Green. Avez-vous fini, monsieur?
Were you finished, Mr. Motz? Mr. Green?
You may recall in the testimony of the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, I was repeatedly trying to get basic information regarding whether or not there was notes available prepared for this committee. Currently, I'll share with you that the only way that we could get that was through an ATIP. And so we did file for the ATIP. And then we just found out that they're going to request another 90 days to be able to provide this basic information. And so again, I just want to underscore the need for this committee to have the ability to demand for documents in a timely way, which is why I think something like this that would give them a timeline on it would hopefully help avoid future instances where people are just, in my opinion, obstructing this committee from being able to do its basic work.
Là, la proposition, oui, monsieur sénateur Carignan et monsieur Virani, mais avant,
I want to make sure that it is understood. Mr. Motz, your amendment is now on the table? Am I understanding this? So, do we agree to pass the amendment? No?
ouais, OK.
You can move it.
Mais ouais, je comprends. Mme Burke me fait remarquer que M. Motz ne peut pas proposer un amendement à sa propre.
Mr. Motz cannot propose an amendment to his own motion, but if someone else moves it, do you agree?
Off the top. One is that there's still no limit on the number of questions, but even more importantly, it arises. There's two more points. A situation could arise where you are then posing written interrogatories towards a Mr. or Ms. Jane or John Doe, who we think is going to show up. Life intervenes; they never show up, and we never have a chance to cross-examine on that information. So, in that situation, I would say that
This would be after
it's only after the evidence. Okay. Okay, but I also have some concern.
Don't get to cross-examine on the response.
Well, then we still don't get to cross-examine on the responses because it's after the evidence has been tendered. But then the last piece is that there's that point in C sub 2, provided that the failure to respond to questions shall be approached by the committee as if a witness declined to respond to an oral question asked at a committee meeting. That to me seems to be going down the slope of actually sanctioning the individual who's failed to respond. Sanctioning people for failing to respond in committee is something that can only be done in our chamber in the House of Commons itself. And if that's leading us towards contempt proceedings, then I've got significant issues with the way this is phrased. And I'll remind my friends opposite that among people on their witness list include conservative politicians such as the Premier of Ontario.
OK. Là, j'ai M. Carignan.
I have Mr. Carignan and then Mrs. Bendayan. I will move the amendment made by Mr. Motz so that it be who appears as a witness and the date of their appearance. But I'd like to add something more, to change the 3 weeks to 7 days. So that it not be 3 weeks after the testimony, but 7 days after. Or 1 week.
I agree with that.
Donc, la motion.
So the motion as amendment would say that once the witness has testified, members of the committee can submit questions in 7 days after the testimony. We're all understanding the same thing? Yes, okay. Is that all, Senator Carignan? Yes. Mrs. Bendayan, and then Mrs. Corte, and Senator White, I believe. Mrs. Bendayan.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, to respond to the amendment moved by Senator Carignan out of respect for the witnesses, not everyone is able to respond to I don't know how many questions, because we haven't talked about that yet, but let's say 30 or 50 questions in a 7-day period. They have other things to do. Sorry, the amendment is saying that members have to provide the questions 7 days. They're not saying that the witness has to respond in 7 days. Oh, thank you for the clarification. So my comment would be limited to say that we could quite easily imagine a situation where, as we know, we're sitting for 2-hour meetings right now. Let's say we have 2 panels of witnesses, 1 hour each. It's quite possible that we won't have the opportunity to deal with all subjects with the witnesses. So let's say we send questions in writing that are not related to their testimony, their oral testimony during the meeting. So I find it's unfair to be able to ask questions on other subjects. This is opening up a Pandora's box by writing, and we don't have the opportunity, as other people said, to look at witnesses in their eyes and to hear their testimony in person. From a procedural and fairness point of view, I find it hard to accept this. Thank you. Senator Corte.
Somebody else doing this? I kept turning it off. Okay, thanks. I guess I've heard the amendment, but I'd like to know exactly what I'm voting on, because I'm hearing the amendment, but like what else is included? Is it included up to 5 questions per individual, and we're giving them 1 week, which could be, if all 11 people around the table give 5 questions, that's 55 questions and 1 week to answer them. That's a bit unreasonable. So could somebody read to me, and I'm brand new, so maybe I'm slow catching on, but just what is the proposed motion with the amendment and without whatever somebody else said?
We only let the senators have 1 question.
But it's always the best one.
C'est tout, Madame Corday?
Is that all, Mrs. Cordy? Senator White.
I don't even know anymore. My perspective is, I thought we were saying we would give them, we would have 7 days to provide them with questions. I don't know that we set a time limit for when they would provide them back. I'm still a little bit concerned that having a limit on the number of questions, only because I know that over here in the House, you guys have a lot more time to write than we do over in the Senate. So I would like to have a little bit of a limitation, maybe even by group. We have, how many groups represented here? 5 or 6 would make it a little bit easier so that people can put their questions together. Otherwise, I honestly can see a lot more work going back and forth than maybe we have time for. So, yeah.
And would we be hiring more staff? Because this would definitely be untenable.
Former Liberal looking for more staff.
It was a suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To be efficient.
Monsieur Virani.
Mr. Virani. Well,
ability to cross-examine on the answers to the interrogatories. I still don't see, pursuant to what Senator White has just mentioned, a limit on the number of questions. And I'll inject a third element here. Sometimes, and we know this works on both sides, that sometimes the questions you pose are in part cued or triggered by what you've heard from the other people around the table. So if something that I feel perhaps Mr. Brock has asked certain questions that have elicited certain types of testimony, I want to perhaps reply to that, respond to it, so I phrase my questions accordingly to elicit some sort of reply or response. That's the natural to and fro of a committee process. You are completely, that possibility is completely eliminated when we're not seeing the types of written interrogatories that are put to the witnesses after the fact. And I think that actually diminishes the quality of the kinds of evidence that we will hear. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Virani. Monsieur Green.
Just in response to the honourable member with the fantastic bow tie, I would say that as a committee, we always have the ability, and quite rightly within our rights as a committee, to call witnesses back. So I'm unwilling to accept the argument that just because the questions are written and they go out, that there isn't an opportunity for cross-examination. If somebody we feel isn't being truthful or perhaps has provided contradictory testimony, we would always remain and retain the right as a committee to call them back to this function. And so, you know, from my perspective, when you talk about the to and fro, I can share with you that many of the meetings that we've had to date have left me feeling pretty incomplete in terms of the opportunity to engage with people. And I think that it would actually be an opportunity for us to be less adversarial by allowing somebody an opportunity to clarify something that was said or provide information that they didn't have at hand, rather than take the position that we feel like maybe they weren't being truthful or maybe they were providing an obstruction in our own opinions, and then start and recapitulate a fight to drag them back before this committee. So I actually look at it in an opposite perspective, that this is an opportunity to prevent that by giving people the opportunity to reply in writing. And if we could, I think, zero in on the number, I would agree with that critique, that if there was either by block or what have you, the opportunity to do that, 3 questions, something that was reasonable, I would be happy to support that. And then on the last point, look, we do have to get to a point where facts are established at this committee. And I'll just I'll continue to repeat that and identify in instances where we don't feel like we're getting that work done. And I think that this is a way to do that. So I hope that we can find a common ground on this and move forward. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Green.
Thank you, Mr. Green. I don't have anyone else on the list. Mr. Motz?
Thank you, Chair. I just, in response to some comments that have been made earlier in regards to the number of questions, I think from history, the Ethics Committee, I believe it was, had a similar type of action on witnesses to the WE scandal, and they found that there was a multitude of questions from all different parties that were similar. And so the responses came back, like you may have got 5, I'm not just making this number up, you may have got 5 or 6 or 8 questions that were almost identical from 5 or 6 or 8 different people, and they responded as one to that question. So we're not going to get, we're not going to get an overabundance of questions. But I agree, if we agree to limit the number of questions that we have, or reduce them, not limit them, but reduce them a bit, I think we can certainly live with that.
Questions.
That's true. What do you think of that? If we submit questions to the clerks and they vet the ones that are the same.
But that's the motion.
How many?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to,
That's true.
if I could, make a recommendation or a suggestion.
Juste avant, peut-être pour être clair,
First of all, to be clear, Senator Carignan and then Senator Boniface are on my list. I don't have anyone else. Mr. Green, you were asking the permission to speak now?
OK, alors, Sénateur Carignan.
Peut-être répondre.
Yes. I would like to answer what Senator Cordy was saying. We're talking about 3 weeks to answer and 6 weeks for the others. It's not 7 days to answer. 7 days for us to ask questions, and then 3 to 6 weeks for the witnesses to provide an answer. And I would also like to add to the comments made by Mr. Green that we can invite them again, but they can also ask to be re-invited if they feel the need to complete their testimony or to provide more specific answers. So this applies to the witnesses as well as to us. Thank you, Senator Carignan. Senator Boniface?
I was just going to suggest, and thank you to, first of all, nice to see everybody back. I was just going to thank Senator Carignan for the clarification, because I think that helps me in terms of where my thinking was on this. And just as a follow-up to Senator White, perhaps in number, if we looked at something like each group provides 2 questions, they merge it together. If we need to think that it's, there's more questions come out of it or something, we can deal with it witness by witness, right? Because, I come from a perspective where I've appeared before committees. And I think that we have to keep in mind, not everybody comes from, a place where they have an army of people behind them to draft and provide their preparation that often. In my experience, my notice to appear was 3 days from hence, and then there's all these demands on you in terms of it. So I think we have to respect that not every witness comes to the table equally. And I think the bigger question we're dealing with here is really getting to the witnesses and then us as a committee working collaborative to really come to terms with what witnesses we need back, and what witnesses we may need some clarification from. So in principle, the way Senator Carignan done the amendment, if we could limit the questions, then I think we will still have witnesses where we'll have to make decisions whether we need them back or not. But this sounds overly overly detailed without really having a vision of who it is we're talking about. And my final point really is it's the witnesses we need to get to and then learn from as we go through the witness list, other issues that may arise. Because we are coming to witnesses that are very core to the actual operation. And I think they're necessary to hear from as soon as possible.
Monsieur Green, et ensuite, ce sera Monsieur Virani. Monsieur
I
Green.
just as a bit of a recommendation, I think that we're getting somewhere, and I think that if you seek it, maybe folks would be open to a 5-minute recess just to work on some of the logistics. And that way we're not just doing our roundabouts, and then hopefully be able to come back to the committee with a tighter proposed amendment that might get us somewhere here.
OK. Vous proposez de suspendre.
You're
Discuss between parties on the logistics of it.
OK. Tout le monde est d'accord?
Does everyone agree with this?
Have actually a reading of the whole motion as it's going to be with an amendment so that it's.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do now. We're going to build it now.
Yes, that's what I want, yeah.
Pour l'instant,
Right now, what we have is the motion as it's written with a couple of amendments that it says rather. We say that it's after they've testified and the week after for the questions. I don't think there are any other changes really to the original motion. I'll let you reflect on this.
Si on refait la motion, voulez-vous juste...
OK, alors on reprend. Alors, Monsieur Motz, vous avez...
Mr. Motz. So I made a bet with Mrs. Burke that we'd finish at 7:30. If we don't succeed, it's going to cost you a coffee. So I'll ask you to help me out.
Well, Monsieur Motz, vous...
Mr. Motz, you have a modified amendment?
Just reading it based on the conversations we had with colleagues, and thank you for your input. So the motion will read now, because Vern doesn't trust that I might slip something in. The motion will read that the committee send to each individual organization who appears as a witness written questions submitted by the members of the committee for response, provided that A, members shall provide their questions to the joint clerks within 7 days of the date of their appearance. B, members may designate up to 2 questions per representative group. C1, to prior to, there is no C1. Individuals, organizations, let me back up. So B, members may designate up to 2 questions per representative group, period. C, individuals, organizations shall be directed to respond to, then you take out priority questions, shall respond within 21 days of the joint clerks sending them. And then C2 is completely deleted. And then we have D, the joint clerks shall arrange for translation of the responses received and circulate them to committee members and publish them on the website upon completion of the translation.
Est-ce qu'on a la motion écrite?
Do we have this in written form?
My written, but I can...
Madame, vous avez... Vous avez, oui, pour le procès verbal?
Do you have it for the minutes?
Clarity now.
Non, Madame Burke me dit que c'est correct, ça va.
Okay.
OK. Alors, je comprends que tout le monde est d'accord.
I understand that everyone is in agreement with this motion, so carried unanimously.
Mon café se rapproche.
So much for my coffee. Okay, now, motion number 4. That the committee, noting the frustrations of its members with certain witnesses evading questions or declining to answer questions on grounds not conceded by this committee or the law of parliamentary privilege, invite the law clerk and parliamentary counsel of the Senate, the deputy law clerk and parliamentary counsel of the House of Commons, and representatives of both houses' procedural services to brief the committee as soon as possible concerning the rights of committees to procure responses to oral questioning and the procedures for compelling those responses. I imagine that my French translation is perhaps not adequate. Maybe your English version is better. In French, we don't say contrainte, but in English, compel is correct. Mr. Motz.
I would classify this as the Matt Green motion, that's a compliment. Yeah, no. No, I think it's just something for clarity. We've talked about, with one of the clerks earlier. I think it's just important that we know where we stand as a committee, what the process should be if we have some need to compel witnesses to actually answer questions, and how we go about doing that. What does parliamentary privilege actually mean when it comes to this committee, and what that all looks like? And I think we should, I think it's quite self-explanatory, and then we have a better understanding of where we have to go should we have witnesses that come forward that refuse to answer questions.
Est-ce que quelqu'un d'autre veut intervenir sur la motion?
Anyone else on notice of motion 4? Mr. Vrani.
I just thought for the purposes of expediting the precious time we have to meet in person, that perhaps this could be addressed by the law clerk of each chamber in writing, so they could just provide this advice to us, as opposed to taking up a precious 2-hour session to talk us through what the rules are from their perspective.
I'd agree to that amendment.
Quel serait l'amendement que vous proposez?
What is the amendment? Could you repeat, Mr. Vrani?
I'm just trying to think how I would amend it. Just an instant.
Arif, if I could suggest that rather than it says that the representatives, that they brief the committee, that they provide a brief to the committee. Yeah. So at the very last line, or second last line, Riel, it says, and representatives of both houses, procedural services, to provide a written brief to the committee as soon as possible concerning the rights of committees and etc.
Est-ce que je comprends que tout le monde...
Do I understand that everyone is in agreement with the amended notice of motion? Yes. Carried as amended. Notice of motion 5. That the committee publish on its website the documents which were produced in response to its order of May 31st, 2022, and circulated to the committee members in July 2022. Any comments?
Non. Tout le monde est d'accord pour Sénatrice Boniface, vous voulez intervenir?
Just perhaps clarity, we indicated circulated to committee members in July 2022. I believe we had a further information that came, and so I would suggest you don't want to limit yourself. You just make it according to the order of May 31st, 2022, period.
On pourrait peut-être, je sais pas,
I'm not sure. I suggest removing the last period. Response to its order of May 31st, 2022, period. Is this what you're saying? To delete the last part?
Ourselves.
Oui, vous avez raison. Est-ce que tout le monde serait d'accord avec...
Yes, you're correct. Is everyone in agreement with the amendment? Yes? Carried. Notice of motion 6. That the committee finds the responses of the RCMP and the Department of Justice to its May 31st, 2022 order to be unacceptable, and is of the opinion that a potential contempt has occurred as a result, and therefore A, directs the joint clerks and analysts to prepare a succinct interim report setting out the material facts of the situation, and B, instructs the joint chairs to present this report to both houses as soon as it has been prepared. Any comments? No? Mr. Vrani? I don't agree with this.
First of all, extremely premature. We haven't finished with the RCMP witnesses yet. So it's presuming a great deal. Secondly, it's finding a fairly significant conclusion, which I would oppose, that a finding of potential contempt has occurred. So I would not be minded to support this motion.
Senator White.
Yeah, I can't agree with this either. I mean, my perspective would be if I felt the questions of the RCMP weren't appropriate, I'd call them back and try this one more time. Rather, there's many witnesses that I haven't been ecstatic about their responses. I might be all here all night holding people in contempt. So I'd rather call witnesses back than get into this type of dialogue at this point. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur White.
Thank you. Mr. Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And having done a little bit of preliminary research and an inquiry on this, perhaps it might be useful for the benefit of this committee if through you to the clerk, there might be a response on what the process might look like from the committee's perspective so that we're adequately able to deal with a process of, if we were to consider it to be contempt, that would follow our procedural bylaws. The question is through you to the clerks. Could the clerk perhaps respond on what would the process be? Sorry, Mr. Chair. The question that I put to you is through you to the clerk, to ask the clerk to just provide committee with a brief overview of what the procedural process would be to initiate a finding of obstruction or contempt.
Mais ça, ce que vous proposez là,
But what you're suggesting is like a separate motion. It's a new motion. Oh, okay. So you want this now?
As sympathetic as I am to the motion, I'm also charitable to the very real critique that there's a presupposition in this. And I just want to put that on the table because for me, process is more important than being right. And I would like to make sure that we're following the process to come to a conclusion that is procedurally correct.
merci, Monsieur Green. Madame Burke, est-ce que vous pouvez répondre à la question? Pardon? Oui.
Ça me dérange pas, ou vous pouvez aussi.
Non, allez-y. Ben,
Go ahead. Mrs. Burke, can you answer? I'll allow you to answer. I prefer for you to answer. Thank you.
The finding of contempt, particularly in the case of refusal to answer a question, the committee would have to adopt a motion compelling the witness to answer the question, first of all, so it would have to be before the committee. Following that, if a motion to compel the witness passed and the witness still refused to answer at that point, a report would be drafted. The committee would adopt a report to that effect, stating the facts and the belief that a contempt has occurred, and then presented in both houses for action.
Thank you for that. And if I do recall, I still have the floor. Thank you for that. And there were other instances as well, which I, in my own opinion, was very frustrated by, and I reference testimony from a senior bureaucrat within the Ministry of Finance who also refused to provide basic information in a way that drew a point of order and a discussion, and that was set aside. And so that's, what led me to the inquiry on what this process is. I do hope that for those that are watching tonight, they recognize the seriousness of this committee. They understand the parliamentary privileges that we have bestowed upon us by our House and the Senate. And they realize that when they come to this committee, that they ought not embark in anything that is lying through omission or obstruction or refusal to cooperate with this committee. And so with that being said, Mr. Chair, I would put through you to perhaps ask the mover of this motion to consider withdrawing the motion, given that it's not procedurally correct, and for us to, in our own work, perhaps come back to this committee if they believe that there were instances that would trigger the processes laid out to us by the clerks so that we can follow the due course within our procedural rules or standing orders.
oui. Merci, Monsieur Green. Monsieur Motz.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for everyone's intervention. I just want to, first of all, this is about document production. This motion is about document production, not about them being here as a witness. So that's what this motion is referring to, because we're talking about responses to our request of May 31st. That's number one. And I think I just want to remind committee members that, we had Department of Justice officials here that basically just thumbed their nose at us. They didn't respond to anything. And so we have, and you're right, Mr. Green, we do have the need to find out, witnesses need to be able to answer the questions that are posed to them and not just refuse to answer. And so we need a process of how we can have a contempt of.
Merci, Monsieur Mott. Oh, have you finished? No?
Well, I'm just suggesting that while I understand that there is a process to find for contempt and we need to do that, we may want to consider the whole idea of developing some protocol within this committee to do exactly Mr. Green suggested and the clerk suggested, and that is that we look at some sort of a motion when we have a witness before us, if we're talking about a witness.
Merci, Monsieur Mott.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. I have to remind the members, and Mr. Motz, I'm keeping your right to speak. Hang on one moment. At the beginning of the meeting, Mrs. Burke received an envelope with a USB key inside. I don't know what's on this USB stick, but it's indicated on the envelope that there would be documents from the RCMP.
Disclosure to RCMP, PCO, CBSA. Alors, il y aura peut-être.
So there might be answers that we're seeking on this USB key, and this evening we don't know the content yet. Mrs. Berg will, I imagine, send this during the week.
Could that be the missing recording from the Nova Scotia event?
Ouais. OK. Donc, il y a quand même, c'est une information importante.
So this is important information with regards to RCMP witness testimony. And I do share the frustration expressed in this motion and other motions as well. And I think that we need to find a way to make sure that we're able to acquit ourselves of the mandate that was conferred to us and do our work. So we do have to take measures to be able to do that. And the spirit of Motion 6 seems valuable, but as I was saying, we received this USB key at the beginning of the meeting. I don't know the content, and secondly, the process doesn't seem to be in accordance with the rules. So, Mr. Motz, you are the one who's moving this, but would it not be a good idea to adjourn the debate on this motion for now, up until we are aware of what's on this USB key, and then you might be able to change the wording in order to take into account the procedural rules for contempt.
And I would ask that we adjourn this particular motion at this time.
Merci, Monsieur Motz.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. It's too late for my coffee, but okay. Mr. Chair, I believe we have to vote. You don't agree with adjourning the debate? Oh, sorry. Well, okay, so we will vote. Yeah, we're going to vote on that, on the proposal to adjourn the debate of Motion 6. Mrs. Burke, or I'm not sure who.
So we're voting on the adjournment of motion number 6. The Honourable Senator Boniface. We're voting on whether to adjourn the debate on motion number 6.
Yes.
Voting to adjourn. So Honourable Senator Boniface votes yes. L'Honourable Senator Carignan, CP. The Honourable Senator Cordy.
Oui.
And the Honourable Senator White.
Oui.
Oui.
Mr. Green.
Il a dit oui.
Oui. Madame Bendayan.
No.
Mr. Nakvi.
No.
Mr. Varani.
No.
Mr. Brock?
Oui.
Mr. Motts?
Yes.
Yeas pour 8, nays contre 3.
Alors, motion ajournée.
So, the notice of motion is adjourned. Now, notice of motion 7, that the committee, noting the use of redactions in the documents provided by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, the Canada Border Services Agency, and the Department of Transport, in response to the committee's May 31st, 2022 order, though the order was silent on authorized redactions, directs the joint clerks to request the deputy heads of those institutions to provide this committee within 2 weeks and in both official languages with a written explanation of the grounds for each redaction made to the documents and, where possible, a summary of the information redacted. Before giving the floor to someone, I will allow a suggestion with regards to the translation. They're not rédaction, it's caviardage is the French word. I'm not sure how to correct this. The French version, redaction, is the English word. In French, we use another word. It's caviardage in French. The English version is correct. Notice of motion 7. Any comments? Someone? Notice of motion 7? Mrs. Bendayan. Yes? Thank you. Yes, with regards to caviardage, a redaction, we discussed this during a previous meeting, and it was my understanding that we agreed on the fact that if we had issues or questions with regards to, if we had questions, or if some documents led to concern, then we would bring forth a specific document and ask questions on it. When I read this notice of motion 7, question seems to be asked on all of the documents, and here we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of documents, so I would invite Mr. Brock and Mr. Motts to identify the documents they're referring to.
Donc, ce que vous demandez, Madame.
So what you want, Mrs. Bendayan, is an amendment to this motion, so that rather that it be general, that they be very specific. What redactions? When you talk about Mr. Motts and Mr. Brock, what they want clarification on? Well, no. I am of the opinion that the motion as it is presented is untenable. And so are you making an amendment? No. Okay. Perhaps Mr. Brock would like to, or Mr. Motts would like to clarify. They can do that. Well, I think it needs to be amended. Here it says each redaction. So what I'm reading is that each redaction needs to be the subject to a written explanation. So will we amend this motion? I'm not sure. On my list, I have Mr. Green, Senator Carignan, and Mr. Varani, Senator White as well. Senator White and Mr. Brock. Mr. Green.
Chair, I just want to say you're doing a great job up there. I appreciate you. I'm going to keep going back to this notion of a duty of candor. I know that the courts have established that they have a duty of candor to the courts. I would argue, as the Grand Inquisitor of the nation, they have a duty of candor to us. And I think that when we were talking about demands for documents, there was a concern. In fact, if I recall the debate correctly, although it was quite some time ago, about who would be redacting them and under what auspices, like what legality they were redacting this information. I do, however, also appreciate the lack of specificity given the volume of documents. And so maybe it's within the spirit of the movers to allow this motion to and I'm not moving this, I'm just speaking out loud, to allow this a motion to be adjourned on debate to then return back with specificity on which specific ones we would like to see a response on. I note the challenge that in heavily redacted documents, you don't know what you don't know. That is going to be a challenge. But I share the frustration of what we received from the RCMP and, from CSIS and CBSA with this regard. So through you, could I ask that question to the mover of the motion? Would you allow me to do that?
Vous pouvez poser la question.
You can ask the question that you would like to ask. I'm not going to stop you, but I'm reiterating here that the motion is clear. It concerns all the redactions. If you want to specify certain ones, this needs to be amended. So the other thing, if you'll allow me, what we'd already discussed, if I remember correctly, and you can contradict me if I'm wrong, is that these redactions could be sent to a neutral party that would study the entire document and specify to the committee if these redactions were legitimate or not. Perhaps I'm wrong. I'm going to give the floor to Senator Carignan. Listen, I find that it's essential. All redactions need to be justified. If someone decided to hide or to redact information, it's because there's a reasoning. Is it a professional secret? Is it a cabinet secret? There's a reason. So it's essential that each redaction be justified. Each part of decisions where a word or information was hidden, this is a decision that was made. And we want to know why the decision was made. And when we will challenge this, we need to know what rules apply, because the rules for professional secrecy is not the same as a cabinet secret or a privilege or a safety issue. It will be important to know this so that we can deal with the information and know the source for the refusal. For me, it's essential. The principle should be is that it should be justified. Thank you, Senator Carignan. Mr. Verani.
Just a few points, Monsieur Fortin. Merci. I feel like, first of all, the text is a little bit misleading. It says, though the order was silent on authorized redactions. The text of the order may not reference redactions, but I have extensive memory about the discussions that went into our preparation for that motion, and we talked about it quite openly, the possibility of redactions occurring, and it was, I felt, understood by all of the members of this committee that there would very likely be redactions based on a number of types of privilege that can be asserted. So that's the first point. The second point is that I feel like burrowing into some of these redactions has the potential to derail the work of this committee to a great extent, especially since we're trying to work on a timely basis to address what we need to do to fulfill our statutory mandate. And the last point I would just say is that based on that, I would be in favor of voting down this motion as it's currently worded. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Virani. Monsieur Brock.
Thank you, Mr. Brock.
Thank you, Chair. I fail to really appreciate the concerns by my Liberal colleagues. And quite frankly, I do recall that conversation that we had about potential redactions and all the grounds by which those redactions could be maintained and established. But at no point in time, because quite frankly, we didn't think it would be necessary to specify in the form of that particular motion in the order that was drafted, that it would compel those officials to do the obvious, to give us some justification for that redaction. That happens all the time, and why it's not done here is very disturbing. When we had the WE committee studying the scandal and all the redactions that flowed and the documentation that was produced, there was always an explanation on every page as to what the redaction pertained to. And I listened very carefully to Senator Carignon's commentary, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. But we also have to accept there's going to be redactions when it comes to personal background information, phone numbers, addresses, things of that nature. And to really put an emphasis on my concerns by my Liberal colleagues taking the position that they are, if this were an ATIP scenario, every redaction would have a legal ground cited. Parliament has far more powers than the ATIP process, yet the government is treating this committee on an inferior basis than a regular citizen under the ATIP process, which I find very disturbing. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Brock.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. I put my name on the list, so I'm going to give myself the floor if you'll allow me. I have Mrs. Cordy afterwards. I do agree with what Senator Carignan was saying. We'll never know if the redaction is justified or not if no one is saying anything. Otherwise, agencies could provide completely redacted documents and we would have no clue if it's legitimate or not. There has to be a process to validate the redaction. It can be to submit the original and redacted documents to an expert, someone that the committee would have confidence in, and with the mandate to do so, to study the proposed redactions and to provide an opinion. This is possible. The second, on this second point, is that we are all held to some rules with regards to confidentiality and the different duties of senators and MPs. But what's more, each and every one of us, before starting to sit on this committee, we all signed a confidentiality agreement on some information that could be provided to us. Up until now, we've never used this confidentiality to obtain information other than what we would you normally obtain. So would this not be our opportunity to do so? For example, when we talk about if Canada Border Services Agency decides that some documents need to be redacted, could we not have them come here in camera, if necessary, to explain why some information needs to be redacted, should not be made public, and then we can decide if we accept the redaction or not. One thing's for certain, we cannot, in my opinion, we cannot receive redacted documents, heavily redacted documents. We're not talking about one word or two. We're talking about entire pages. We cannot receive this and say nothing. Otherwise, our mandate is totally illogical. So we have to either have the complete information, either have the justification why we're not being provided complete information, and this is my opinion. This being said, I'm going to give the floor to Senator Cordy.
Very much. I totally understand that redactions are very frustrating, but I'd like to just have a vote now or adjourn this for another time because we're not going anywhere with it right now.
It's House rules. You can adjourn debate, go to a vote if you wish.
Oh, you can adjourn and go to a vote?
You can do that if you wish.
Okay. I'll adjourn and go to a vote. I'd like to adjourn and go to a vote on this motion.
There's no adjourning
On
and
peut
going
pas
to a
faire
vote.
les
It's
deux,
one
là.
adjourn.
On ajoute.
You can't do both. You either adjourn or you vote.
We can, we're able to vote. We can
Vous
vote.
proposez, juste une seconde, pardon. Le sénateur,
Hang on. Senator Cordy, you're proposing to adjourn the debate on the motion. Is that correct? All right. So do I have unanimous consent to adjourn the debate? No? So we'll go to the vote. Mr. Palmer? On the motion of adjourning the debate?
The adjournment motion on the debate of motion 7. The Honourable Senator Boniface.
Yes.
L'Honourable Senator Carignan CP.
Oui.
The Honourable Senator Cordy.
Yes.
The Honourable Senator White.
Madame Bendayan.
No.
Mr. Nakvi.
No.
Mr. Varani.
No.
Mr. Brock. Mr. Motz. Yeas poll 9. No. Yeas poll 8. Nays contre 3.
Je cherchais où était le 9e. Donc merci, madame.
So, motion number 8. Oh, well, the debate on motion 7 is adjourned. Motion 8, that the committee, noting the undertaking of the Privy Council Office to provide to this committee certain documents which will be provided to the Public Order Emergency Commission, which are also responsive to the committee's May 31st, 2022 order, despite not doing so directly in response to the committee's order, while also observing that relevant cabinet minutes, among other documents, were disclosed by the government in federal court proceedings and have been subject to media reporting, but which have not been provided to this committee, invites the clerk of the Privy Council to appear before the committee to discuss these matters, among other things. Anyone on the motion? Mr. Green.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity within this motion to, first of all, demand for all the documents to be presented to this committee and submitted to this committee. I think that would be helpful and appropriate. And then if there was, a will to bring the Privy Council back to this committee to answer for why they didn't provide it in the first place, to me, this motion actually falls in the same kind of procedural gray area as the other motion relating to obstruction or contempt. So if we believe that this is a situation that warrants that, then I would suggest that we pursue it in that way. But I do, and I am frustrated that this stuff came because we did learn more over the last 2 months than we did in the first 6 months of this committee. And I think it was completely unnecessary in terms of the delay in getting to this information. But, Mr. Chair, in all the court proceedings, quite frankly, I'd like to see documents that are made public record within those proceedings relevant to this committee be submitted to this committee. So if I could move an amendment that we request from the government all documents pertaining to this committee that are being publicly released in the courts, I think that would at least help us catch up to where that process is. So, yeah.
OK. Ouais, j'ai la sénatrice Boniface qui...
Senator Boniface, but I would like, Mr. Green, do you have an amendment to move?
Ouais.
Not to replace, to be clear, Mr. Chair? I would allow the movers to argue why they believe it would be important to bring the PCO back before this. In my opinion, procedurally, it seems to be alluding to the same type of obstruction that we dealt with in the previous motion. But I would, however, like to have a process in place where when documents are submitted by the government in court proceedings and become public.
Vous avez expliqué, Monsieur Green.
Mr. Green, you explained this earlier, but I just wanted to clarify the amendment that you're suggesting. The wording would be what? What are you doing as an amendment?
Est-ce que je peux poser une question?
Could I ask a question for clarification purposes? Yes, go ahead.
Suggesting that all publicly available documents be available to this committee from the court proceedings.
Correct.
And your propose could that be proposed in a separate motion, because I think
I'm happy to do that at a later time. I'll take it back, Mr. Chair, and I'll draft it and
Merci, Monsieur Green.
I'll make sure it's in both official languages as well, Mr. Chair.
Vous me simplifiez la vie. Merci.
Thank you. You're making my life easier. Thank you, Mrs. Boniface. And then Mr. Motz. Hang on.
Oui, ça prend le consentement unanime.
We need unanimous consent to withdraw Mr. Green's proposed amendment. Yeah, okay. Mrs. Boniface.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I find this, and maybe it would be helpful if Mr. Motts actually speaks first, because I find this confusing and was more convoluted once Mr. Green spoke, because I think we may have covered it in another motion. So I'm really finding this one difficult to understand what we're asking for, and maybe particularly when I see at the end, among other things, that could be a range, and perhaps it's helpful if Mr. Mott speaks.
Madame Boniface. Monsieur Motts.
Okay. I'll defer some of this to my colleague, Mr. Brock, but I just want to explain that I agree with Mr. Green that having the Privy Council office, the clerk there, provide all documents to this committee is critical, and that's obviously the intent of this. But also, there needs to be some explanation on the clerk's part as to why, to help us understand why we don't get documents when we ask for documents. It makes no sense to me that the courts get them. And I'm sure that'll come up in Mr. Green's motion, but we can also add it here. And but it's the idea that we ask for these documents, as part of the May 31st order, and that we were not provided documents, and yet the Privy Council office sends certain documents to the Commission, and we don't have those, and they send documents to federal court on other matters in regards to the Emergencies Act that are before those courts, and yet we do not have those, and we're blocked from having them. I don't understand why, and I think the clerk of the Privy Council needs to come to explain why, and that's also a comment that Mr. Green made earlier, is there needs to be some accounting somewhere, and maybe if someone of the stature of the clerk of the Privy Council will recognize that this committee has an opportunity, a privilege to get access to the information that is available to other matters, to other situations or other venues, then we should be able to have them based on the order we got.
Merci, Monsieur Motts. Monsieur Brock.
All right, so I'm going to start off by seeking some direction from you, Mr. Chair, and the clerk, if necessary. Do I have the ability to seek a friendly amendment to this motion, notwithstanding my name is attached to the motion itself? I appreciate that.
I could help you, I think.
Or perhaps my senator friend could help me. So that's fine. To Matthew's, to Mr. Green's point in his kind suggestion about drafting a separate motion, which in my view deals with the substance or the substantive matter that we're trying to seek here, access to the documentation. Of course, it's very, very clear, given the media reports, that the clerk of the Privy Council has clearly relevant information for the purposes of this committee. So might I suggest, as a friendly amendment that could be put forth by my friend Senator Carignan, oh, and it's been drafted for me, thank you, that the committee invite...
Il faudrait le donner. Je vais donner la parole au sénateur.
I'm going to give the floor to Senator Carignan. If Senator Carignan is moving this...
Désolé, Monsieur Brock.
Sorry, Mr. Brock.
Il ne peut pas le faire.
Ouais, OK. Alors.
Friendly amendment to read that the committee invite the clerk of the Privy Council to appear before the committee to discuss the production of documents, including claims of cabinet confidence. Is that confidence for the committee and other proceedings related to the public order emergency.
That's a very good idea. I move that.
Ouais. Je m'interroge, par exemple, est-ce que ça constitue...
Well, I'm wondering, is this an amendment? Because if you're talking about an amendment to the motion, if we're talking about an amendment to motion 8 of Mr. Motz and Mr. Brock, we have to specify what words are being changed and where. Are you reading a new motion, Mr. Brock? I like it. I like the intention, but I think it's a separate motion, and this is not an amendment anymore. Perhaps it could be moved separately. I'm not sure. But if we want to make an amendment to motion 8, I need to know what wording is being changed exactly. If you'll allow me, given that we've already... Hang on. We're not yet there, Mrs. Bendayan. I gave the floor to Mr. Brock. Now I have Mr. Green and Mr. Verani. I can add your name to the list. But right now, the floor is to Mr. Brock. No, it's not an amendment. It's another motion, Mr. Chair. Go ahead, Senator Carignan. I propose to amend.
For the words committee, we will remove line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to invited, and it will continue by invite the clerk of the Privy Council to appear before the committee to discuss. We will remove the words these matters, among other things. We will replace by the producing document, including claims, the cabinet confidence for this committee, and other proceeding related to the public order emergency.
Appel à l'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Call to order. One moment. I have the amendment made by Senator Carignan, and this is what we're going to discuss from now on. But I do have a point of order that I will hear from Mrs. Bendayan. You stated as chair of this committee that the amendment was not in order, and then you said that it was a new motion, and visibly, by taking out 6 lines of the motion, it's a new motion. So I would like to clarify. It seemed that you had made a decision that this was a new motion. Thank you, Mrs. Bendayan. What I was saying was that the text that what Mr. Brock was reading seemed to be a new proposal. And now what we have is the amendment that was made by Senator Carignan. It seems to me to be in order. The lines that are deleted, well, it's kind of a context, but there is still the request of inviting the clerk of the Privy Council, and rather than discussing issues, they talk about... I didn't really mark down exactly what he was said. He can repeat it, but in my opinion, it seems to be an amendment that is in order with the rules of procedure. So fully receivable. Mr. Green.
During the time, typically we do have a bit of a brief break to allow people to refresh themselves. I would like to put the request that we have a 5-minute recess at this time to allow people to do that, and then we can come back to this, because I think we're going to be at a bit of a loggerhead here, and so I'd like to ask for 5 minutes.
Monsieur,
Je veux juste une seconde. Est-ce qu'on serait prêt?
Are we ready to vote on this amendment now? No. So I will hear Mr. Green's comment. It's 8:10, and we have to leave at 8:30. So 5 minutes and no more. Everyone is in agreement? Is this okay, 5 minutes? Adjourn for 5 minutes. All right. Mr. Motz?
Discussions with all parties in the room. I move to adjourn debate on this particular motion.
Est-ce que je comprends que tout le monde est d'accord?
Everyone is in agreement? Debate is adjourned on motion 8. Mrs. Bendayan said at the beginning of the meeting that she had a motion. Yes, the clerk has received it. Mrs. Clerk, the interpreter does not have it, but I have copies for everyone. In the meantime, I can briefly present this by saying that it is a motion in order to make sure that the work of our committee Mrs. Bendayan will explain the content of her motion while it's being sent around. Yes, so this is a motion that specifies many witnesses that we could invite for the upcoming meetings, that we invited Peter Slowly, Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson, and representatives from the Ottawa Police Service to appear for 1 hour each, that the committee invite the Parliamentary Protective Service, the Sergeant-at-Arms of the House of Commons, and representatives from the Corporate Security Directorate from the Senate to appear on one panel for a period of 2 hours, and that these meetings take place as soon as possible, subject to witnesses' availabilities. So, Mr. Chair, I would like to have these witnesses appear for 2, 3, 5 hours, but given that we have limited amount of time, what is being suggested here is in the text of the motion. We could always invite them again as needed. And now that we have gone through our colleagues' motions, we also have the possibility to send written questions. So this is my motion for discussion and debate. Thank you, Mrs. Bendayan. So if I understand, I have Mr. Motz who wanted to speak and Senator White, but I'm trying to understand what you're asking is for 1 hour each for 2 witnesses, the Mayor of Ottawa, Mr. Watson, and the Police Service of Ottawa, and no, 1 hour for each of the 2 witnesses. 1 hour for each. And the 3 others? No, it's a panel. 1 panel for a 2-hour period together. So the Sergeant-at-Arms, Senate, Corporate Security, and Parliamentary Protective Service, a 1 panel. Mr. Motz?
Thank you, Ms. Bendayan, for bringing this forward. I like the witness list. I would make some suggestions. Given the importance of former Chief Slowly and Mayor Watson, and then not just representatives, I think we need to name the Ottawa Police Service we want. I think we name the interim chief. I think we name the acting deputy chief to appear for 2 hours each. Have to. I mean, we can. I think that's, and then the rest of it, the Protective Services, Sergeant-at-Arms, and the Corporate Security Directorate for a panel for 2 hours. I can live with that.
So you're proposing 2 hours for Peter Slawley, 2 hours for Mayor Watson, and 2 hours for both representatives?
Yes, for chief, the current interim chief and the acting deputy chief from together.
Donc, Monsieur Slowly, 2 heures, Monsieur Watson, 2 heures, et ensuite, Monsieur Motz, le temps pour les autres témoins?
The committee invite Peter Slowly, Ottawa Mayor Watson, and interim chief, Ottawa Police Service interim chief, and acting deputy chief for 2 hours each. And then...
Donc, 8 heures au total.
So an 8-hour total.
2 heures.
Each 2 hours.
The Ottawa Police Service would be 1 2-hour panel
OK, pour les deux.
for two people,
Okay.
2-hour panel. And then the rest would be the same for another 2-hour panel. And then I would propose one more witness, as we can put in from the last motion, the clerk of the Privy Council.
No.
We don't want her?
After.
Well, we got a disconnection, but that's a totally different day.
We can do Karik.
Yeah, okay.
Karik,
Yeah, that's fair.
Karik needs to be 2
We
hours.
we can do Karik, yeah. The OPP Commissioner Karik
For 2 hours.
for 2 hours. Yeah. And that gets us going, Raquel. It helps us get moving.
I have no problem with the idea in principle. It's just that we have a very limited number of meetings and a huge witness list, which we all contributed to. So
Yeah.
I'm just mindful of using our time judiciously.
And I agree. The only thing is I will guarantee you that in 1 hour, with all of us here, we're not going to get through Mr. Slowly or Mr. Watson, and we're going to be calling them back. So I just want to try and be as efficient as we can, because maybe we can deal with them in 1 2-hour slot and not have to bring them back again.
Monsieur Green.
Mr. Green?
I think it's also important to recognize that not all witnesses are created equal in this situation. I think the witnesses that you have in this motion are quite appropriately foundational witnesses. I would like to just note that we are in an election cycle municipally, and that we may want to, through the clerks, put a priority on the mayor to request the mayor be here while he is the sitting mayor of Ottawa, because in a month he won't be, and he may be less available given retirement. So if there's the ability to prioritize Chief Slawley and the mayor on the front end, that might be helpful just in terms of timing. Just a suggestion.
Merci, Monsieur Green.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. White? I apologize, I had your name on the list and I forgot. I gave the floor to Mr. Green, but I should have given it to you. It was my mistake, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, that was good. No, I was looking at the OPP Commissioner. I'm good, thanks.
Could I just politely suggest 90 minutes as a compromise? I'm just again conscious of getting through stuff in somewhat of an efficient manner.
On a des rencontres de 2 heures, alors.
We have 2-hour meetings.
Yeah.
We might get through.
Perhaps a day of a constituency week to get through some witnesses.
That's fine.
Can live with that.
Sorry, I'm doing this off the. But yeah.
Sometimes that's the way to get things done.
Yeah. Oh, oops. Pardon.
Depends when.
OK. Alors, là, j'ai.
So now, I've lost, I forget where we are here. You spoke among yourselves. Mrs. Benday and Mr. Motz. Mr. Motz presented an amendment to my motion. And I believe that we are in agreement. Yes, but we haven't. Yes, we do. Everyone's in agreement. Mr. White, are you in agreement? Mr. Green? Yes?
OK. Alors, donc, vous avez, Madame Burke, noté.
Mrs. Burke? You took note. I understand that. Could you repeat, Mr. Motz, to make sure that we have this correctly? The name of the witness and the time.
Thank you. And thank you, Rachel. Peter Slowly, 2 hours. Mayor Watson, 2 hours. Interim chief and acting chief of the Ottawa Police Service, 2 hours. The OPP commissioner, 2 hours. And then the PPS, Sergeant at Arms for the House, and the Corporate Security Directorate for 2 hours.
Okay.
Does that work? Is that what you're thinking? Okay, perfect.
Ça veut dire qu'au total, on a.
This means 10 hours of testimony. If we add up all of this, 8 2, Mr. Slowly, 2, Mr. Watson, 2, Acting Deputy Chief and current Interim Chief, 2 for the OPP Commissioner, and then 2 hours for the panel. That's 5 times 2. I have 10 hours here. Agreed? Agreed. Anyone else?
OK, alors, motion adopt. Rencontre ajournée. Merci.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next week.